Hello, welcome to audio recording tutorial number 5. I'm Jonathan Clark. I'm going to put a link here at the bottom of the screen right now back to tutorial number 3. If you haven't watched tutorials 3 and 4, you should probably go back and watch those first before you watch this one. All three of these are part of the same overall project. So 3, 4, and 5 are a study in doing multi-tracking in layers, and they're all using the same project files, same session files. So go back and watch those if you haven't yet, but if you have watched the others, then let's get right back to work. Alright, I'm back. So, like I said, I've just done some editing while I had the cameras paused. A little more than I expected. Basically what I did was I went through the rest of the bass track and went right till the end, edited everything. And so now we're about to do the same thing with the strings track and then the acoustic guitar track. Now, there's going to be a difference in the way that I edit the strings and the guitar compared to how I edited the bass. The bass, I wanted that to be part of the backbone of the song. So I wanted the bass notes to line up very, very accurately with the chords in the piano. So because of that, I had to do a lot of little edits. Now when we get to the strings and the acoustic guitar in a minute, it's going to be a different mindset entirely. With both of those instruments, it's going to be a lot more fluid, flexible, and not tied so much to the rigid timeline that I created with the piano and the bass. Now the strings themselves are especially different because with all instruments, all sounds, there's something called the attack time. And the attack time is the amount of time that it takes for the sound to go from no volume up to its loudest volume at the start. Now, with a lot of instruments, the attack time is relatively quick. Like, we're talking, you know, definitely much less than 1/10 of a second. It's just almost instantly, bang, you hear the instrument. With some instruments, there's a much slower attack time. And these strings, well, strings in general, but especially these keyboard strings, are one of those exceptions where the attack time is very slow. When I hit the notes on the keyboard, it kind of ramps up from nothing to its full volume over the course of maybe half a second. Hopefully you can hear that with the camera. Okay, so because of that, there's not really any definable start point to the note anyway. You could say the start is where I hit the keys, but if you do that, at that point, the volume is still 0, so it doesn't really seem to synchronize with the bass note. And if I go with the loudest point, say half a second into the note, well, I could try and synchronize that with the bass note, but you'd hear the note coming through before the bass note hits, and it makes the strings sound kind of rushed. It makes it sound like they're playing ahead of time, because you hear that hint of the strings coming in before it's their time. So basically with the strings, whenever a bass note hits, you kind of get a swell of sound of the strings shortly afterwards. That's very natural, and we're going to stick with that. The other thing that works in our favor is the strings are going to be fairly low volume in the mix. They're going to be off to the side and they're going to be subdued. They just add a little bit of fullness to the mix. Now with the acoustic guitar, same sort of thing. The acoustic guitar is not setting the beat of the track, of the song. So it's a little bit looser, more fluid, and you can tell that it's somebody playing along with the piano. So what's going to happen is, I mean, there's some positive things here. With the strings and the acoustic guitar, when I played them with a lot more accurate timing to the piano than I did with the bass. So right off the bat, we have a huge advantage there. They are pretty well timed. And that, plus the fact that they don't have to be perfectly timed, means there's going to be very little editing in the strings or the acoustic guitar. The bass was a complete difference. My timing was bad when I played, so that needed a lot of fixes, plus the fact that they had to be very accurate, so that's why you see tons of edits. Now, while I was paused, I actually went a little further than I had intended to. So let's take a look. The bass, I went right through to the end of the song, but I also figured that I would do the editing of the last 3/4 of the strings track and the acoustic guitar track too. So you can see here, obviously, where I finished editing the bass, but I started at about the 1 minute mark, the second verse, and I went through and edited the strings, and you can see there's very little I had to do. And the same thing with the guitar. All I ended up really doing with the guitar was I turned the volume off during that quiet section where I wasn't playing, so you can't hear my chair creaking or can't hear me rustling around. So let's take a moment and we will, let's see what I actually did with the bass first of all. So I'll zoom, I've got the strings and guitar muted. We'll zoom the bass out that way, and we'll also highlight just a very narrow section. I'll leave the piano on for a little bit, then I'll turn it off. And I'll just play through this through the rest of the track so you can actually see what I did to it. Now, you probably can't hear it on the YouTube video because of the noise on the camera microphones, but there's actually a fair amount of background noise in this bass track. Now, it's partly because I have it turned up so much just while I'm editing and listening, but that does concern me. We may have to try and take a little bit of noise out in a few minutes once we get a little further. And it's really obvious if you happen to have Audition and you download all these files, because the link is in the text description underneath the YouTube video, you can download a folder, a zip file, which contains the folder with this entire session in audio. So if you happen to have Audition, you can load this session in and play with it. But you should be able to hear the background noise quite obviously, and whenever there's a gap between the clips, there's no noise in that because there's no audio. And in those points, the noise becomes very, very obvious. Anytime that I'm making edits where there's still clip playing the entire time, the noise is constant in the background, so you don't notice it as much. See, right through this whole section, the noise is not that obvious, but here, and here, and here, very obvious when you're listening to the actual session files in headphones. Okay, that sounds pretty good. So, certainly sounds a lot better than it did. Let's, where do we begin? Okay, what we'll do is we'll mute the bass now. We'll go through the strings, and we'll edit the first minute of the strings and see what that sounds like. See if we have to make any changes. Hopefully not. Okay, I'm a little concerned with this section. You probably heard the pitch goes up, which is fine, but the volume also goes up. And you can also kind of see it in this area on the waveforms where they get a little thicker. So let's put a couple automation breakpoints in there. And we'll drop that volume down temporarily and see if that sounds more constant as it plays through that section. Yeah, that's a lot better, I think. Maybe just a very slight bit of the same in this section. Okay, so from this point on I've already gone through and listened. Very little that I wanted to change. Let me skim through this quickly and we'll take a quick listen and see what I did make for changes, just so you know. The volume really jumped right there. Actually, I think maybe we'll change that a little bit more. Okay, that's better. Then no changes, no changes. Now here my timing got a little bad. It was unfortunate that this note here I hit quite late. And so when I sliced this section and moved it to the left earlier on the timeline to make it match these beats a little bit closer, the problem was I left a gap right here. And with that gap right there, well, what happens is we end up with things not sounding natural. Let's see if we can get rid of that gap. Okay. Okay, the piano's still ringing for a while there. Let's see if we can extend that so it doesn't fade out quite as fast. Better. And then through the rest of the song, really nothing, one minor edit right there, and good until the end. Okay, so that's what we did for the strings. So let's make the strings a little bit smaller. Let's mute those strings, we'll turn on the guitar, and we'll come up and do some guitar editing. Oh, one more thing I'll do is I'll fade the volume in right there. Okay, so with the guitar, let's go through and edit these first 60 seconds. Okay, so I went through the rest of the file from this point on, and basically I did nothing until I faded the volume out here going into the break. Now you're probably wondering, why did I not just put a single point here and a single point down here and have a straight line going down? Wouldn't it make more sense to fade it out evenly? Why did I do a curve so it only starts fading a little bit and then more and more, faster and faster? The reason for that is because sound is, it's a logarithmic decay time. Without going into any details about that, that's kind of hard to explain. But the thing is, if you do a straight line between 2 points to fade stuff out, what happens is it sounds like the audio fades out a whole lot at the start, and then the rest of it fades out more slowly. And so to compensate and to make it sound to our ears like it's fading out evenly over time, you only fade a little bit at the start and then more and more as time goes on. So your fade out curves are always going to be, instead of a straight decline or a straight incline, they're going to be humps. Now, if I were to actually zoom in on the section in the bass here, look at that. See, Audition knows this, and it does the exact same thing. When it does those cross fades automatically, it creates humps instead of straight lines. And so that's why you have this pattern instead of something that looks like a letter X. Okay, going through, no more changes to guitar, brought the volume back on, and then faded out at the end. So basically, yeah, that's all that we need to consider so far. So what we've done now is we've adjusted the timing on everything. I'm kind of happy with the way the timing is working out. If I were to play the whole thing, I won't bother playing the whole thing, that'll take up too much time, but let's just listen to a few seconds. Okay, so it's still not perfect by any means, but music is not mechanical. This type of music's not mechanical, so it's not meant to be totally perfect. So let's, okay, what are we going to do now? The next thing that I want to do is I want to investigate that bass and see if we have to get rid of the noise. And then we're going to do our EQing to kind of carve out a little place for each separate instrument. And then we'll see if we need to do some reverb, and we'll do a mixdown. So, in order to do that, if I want to change things like the reverb on a section, or the EQ on a section, I don't want to have it all cut up into pieces like this. Because that means once I figure out what I want a piece to sound like, I would have to go in and make those changes in about 100 different clips. Because when you zoom in on something here, if I go and double click that to get into waveform view, and I go to highlight this thing by double clicking or hitting Control A, all it's highlighting is the clip that was visible in multi-track section. Now, if you take a look, you can see up here on our universal timeline bar that this little block is what's highlighted, and the rest of the track is visible. But what I want to do to make this a little bit easier is I'm going to bounce some of these tracks so they make more sense. Okay? So to do that, I'm going to mute everything that I'm not bouncing, and we're going to bounce all three of these tracks: bass, string, and acoustic guitar. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set our track volume adjustment to 0 for each of them, because I don't want to be playing with that. We'll play with the volume more in a minute. Then, to do the bounces, I'm going to highlight the entire section. Now you'll notice I've got my time tool here. You'll notice that I start in the bass track and move, click on my mouse and keep the button held down and drag across all these clips. And you can kind of see the rectangle with a small dashed line. If I let go, all of the clips in this track are highlighted. And so what I'm going to do, I want those all to be highlighted because I'm going to go to Bounce to New Track and I'm going to go Selected Clips Only. And hit click. And what have we got now? Okay, this is the new bounced bass track and it is going to sound exactly like this one. So let's mute this and we will rename this, let's see, bass good timing. I'm going to double click on that and I'm actually going to save the underlying audio file and call it bass good timing. Actually, let's call it bass bounced. Okay. Now, let's mute that. We'll unmute the strings. We'll do the same thing with the strings, but we won't actually do quite the same thing with the strings. You can see that my strings track is lighter gray over here than all these other tracks. And up here, the header is lighter gray. That means that track is selected. So we're going to go to multi-track and we're going to go Bounce to New Track, Selected Track, and we're going to hit OK. All right, and this time yes. Now, you'll see that the waveform now looks like it's a lot louder on the left than it is on the right. Is that a good thing? Well, no, because what's happened is it's taken my panning, my left 50 panning, and it's applied that. And so my left side is louder and my right side is softer because of that. Do I want that? No, I don't think I do. So let's Control Z to backtrack, and we'll temporarily take the panning off when we do our bounce. Okay, strings. So once again, multi-track, Bounce to New Track, Selected Track, and looks like it's done properly. We're going to mute it. We're going to make it small. We are going to pan this the way we had intended, now that we've saved it, or now that we've bounced it. And I'm going to call this Strings Good Timing. That's the track name. I'm going to zoom into the clip and I'm going to save it as Strings Bounce. Because again, your underlying file name does not have to match your track name, what you call the track. Okay, now, when I bounced the bass, I had the panning off to the side. So do we want to try and redo that? Let's see if we can. If we delete and we now have that track highlighted, bass track highlighted, mute is off. We'll set our panning to 0. Just hit 0. And, well, if I want to bounce into this track, the destination track has to be highlighted. Let's see, can I do this? And then highlight here. Bounce, well, there's no selected clips. Basically, this bounce is probably going to end up in a different track than I had intended, but that's okay. So, 0 panning, track highlighted, multi-track, bounce, selected track. Okay, where did it end up? It came into this new track. Can I dump this down here, drag it down. I can. Now the only drawback is this may have moved a little bit to the left or right as I did that drag. So let's do this instead. We'll go into this track, we'll delete it, and we'll just rename this one to say bass good timing. Mute, minimize, set this to the pan that we had intended, around 8 or 9. Okay, so that one's fixed, and we'll mute, and we'll go and do our final bounce. Acoustic guitar track is highlighted. Bounce to new track. Oh, we should unmute that. Try again. Bounce to new track, select a track. Perfect. And, oh, not perfect. Control Z, undo. We had it panned. Let's take that pan off. Try the process again. Multi-track, bounce to new track, select a track. Excellent. That looks like what we wanted. So we'll mute this one. We will change the pan on this. We had it around 40, I think. We will rename it to Acoustic Guitar Good Timing. And we will double click and we will save as Acoustic Guitar Bounce. And luckily that didn't take because I spelled it wrong. We'll hit OK and we'll go back into multi-track. So one of the most confusing things that we've covered here today is the difference between clips and tracks and channels and stuff like that. So I hope you understand the difference between the 3 different types of renaming that I've been talking about here. So I want to just clarify this to make sure this all makes sense to you. First of all, you can rename the file name of the underlying audio file which is stored on the hard drive of your computer. Secondly, you can rename the track or channel name in your session. And the point of doing that, it's just kind of a big picture thing. It's to help you organize your session, but it doesn't change the name of the file that's on the hard drive. And finally, you can rename individual clips that are laid out in your channel or laid out in your track. And each of those represents an interpretation of the underlying audio file on your hard drive. So what's the point of having clips? Well, it comes back to the difference between destructive and non-destructive editing. Clips make it easy to have non-destructive editing. Now, earlier in one of these videos, I said that I was going to be doing mostly destructive edits, and it turns out that wasn't actually correct. I did a lot of non-destructive edits. So, if you think about the times that I zoomed in to a track, not zoomed in, I double-clicked and went into waveform view, and then I made changes to a track that way. So that would include things like when I applied EQ to a track, I applied reverb to a track, or I applied changes in amplification. So each time I did that and then saved the track again, it saved the underlying file, and so that was a destructive edit. But when you're back out in session view, every time I was doing things like slicing with the razor, or putting automation curves on my volume, those are non-destructive edits. So when I did changes to clips that way, it didn't actually change the audio file that was on the hard drive. So hopefully you understand the distinction between that, because that's certainly quite confusing. And once you get your head wrapped around that, everything starts to make sense. So why would you want to be able to name your tracks? Again, it comes back to organization. Let's say that you're putting together a song and you're using a drum track that was recorded somewhere else, and that track, the audio file, is called something like kit 17 take 13 march _011.wav. you know, that's a pretty crazy name, but that's what the audio name is on the hard drive. But in your session, you might want to just call it drums. It makes so much more sense when you're working with things if you can just look at it quickly and say, oh yeah, this is the drum track. You don't have to know exactly what the underlying audio name was. So hopefully this all makes sense. Okay, so if I'm going to play something, what I want is, we don't need track 6. Let's use this, so let's delete that one. Do I want to delete, oh, that got pretty big. Some of these tracks we're not really going to be using that much in the next little while. So I've got them muted. Can I hide them somehow? Track. No, there's no hide. In some software programs, there is a hide function. So let's do this instead. Let's move the bass track that we're not using up to the top. We'll use the strings track that we're not using to the top. We'll move the acoustic guitar that we're not using to the top. And then we'll expand the size of the piano, the bass. Oops, I gotta stop doing that. Stereo piano, bass, strings, guitar. And I'm going to take the mute off of these. These are the 4 tracks that we're going to work with now for the rest of the time. So I'm going to hit Control Save, Control S. Let's make sure this is working well. Okay, that seems to be pretty good. For the piano, are we going to keep it sounding the way it is? Or are we going to change the EQing? Well, it's kind of our center instrument, and I don't want to do a lot to it, but I think I do want to cut out some of the low end so the bass comes through a little bit more. So I'm going to turn off that L point. I've got a high pass filter here. We'll give it a sharp octave. Let's have this playing in the background so we can hear what's going on. It's starting to sound kind of empty there. Let's hope that works. Now with some software, we can do non-destruct. See, this is one drawback right now with the way I'm approaching this project, is I'm doing destructive changes to the EQing as I work on each track. In other projects, other editors, you might have it set up so that the track underneath doesn't change and the EQ just processes stuff in real time. That's a better situation. You can actually do it with this if you set it up a little bit differently. But for now, I'm not going to hit Control S to save this track, even though I just added the EQ, in case I want to come back and hopefully I can do a Control Z. It's a little bit tricky because if I work with another track, the changes that I make to undo that, I would have to undo back through those changes to get to the undo from this, you would think. Or do you? Let's look at this. That's a good thing. History. History of changes. Parametric equalizer. So let's just play with the other tracks and see what happens here. The bass. Okay, with the bass, I want to keep that low end. And I want to get rid of some of the upper frequencies where the piano is playing more steadily. So let's do this. I'm still going to put a bit of a high pass, but remember that nobody can really hear below 20 Hertz anyway. So I've got the high pass starting at 28.6. The stuff that I've just cut out is not going to really make a difference. I have my low pass turned on. Let's turn off some of these edit points because we're not going to use them all. Let's see what this sounds like. So having the EQ turned off, you really hear that attack of each note, the punch, the transient at the start. But that is the frequency range where the piano's playing. So maybe getting rid of that attack. Oh, if we raise our low pass up to around 4 or 5K as the starting point for the drop off, then we're still going to get that transient. Now, do we have another way of doing this? Yeah, let's see what happens if we put the low pass up here, so we still get some transient. We do a bit of a 0.2. We'll make a quite wide width on 0.2, and we'll kind of lower the EQ setting, the frequencies in all this range from 1K and up, which is where the piano really is strong. And so we still have a little bit of attack, but it's not as loud. So you can still hear that. Now let's also take 0.1 and we'll raise it and give it a little bit more low end. So that's with it off. It's not really exciting. That's a lot thicker and more full down in the low end where we want that. And we still retained a tiny bit of the transients of the attack. I'm going to try that, see what happens. Okay, let's go into multi-track again. Strings, well. Let's actually play these things together for a second and see what happens. That bass, the piano sounds really clear. The bass to me sounds a little bit too muddy. Let's Control Z to undo our EQ that we just did. We'll go into the EQ again, and we'll keep a little bit of that low end, but I'll probably not cut out the transients as much. Okay, let's see if that makes a bit of a difference. Okay, I like that. Those seem to work well together. Let's mute the bass for a second and go into the strings, unmute them, and see what we've got. Okay. EQ, strings. I think what I want with the strings is to have a very narrow band where the range kind of above the bass, so let's have the strings not really kicking in until they're up above 200 Hertz. And we'll cut a bit of the high end out. Let's see what it sounds like. That makes a huge difference. I like that. That's enough to get. When I had it set at 200, I wasn't really catching the low note in the left hand that I was playing on the strings. So that's why I dropped it back down to 100. That should get rid of a lot of the muddiness that would clash with the bass. And what about the high end? Maybe I should drop that a little. So again, you can see that I'm doing a subtractive process here. I'm taking away parts of the spectrum, not adding. Let's see what that sounds like with just the piano and the strings. Let's try it with just the bass and the strings. I think maybe I took out just a tiny bit more than I should have. So let's undo. Once again, we'll go into our EQ. And I think I want a little bit more thickness down there and up here. So piano and strings together. Okay, those seem to work well together. And finally, the guitar. So let's see what that sounds like. Oh, I want to... Yeah. Okay, let's highlight that and see what we're going to do with the guitar, with EQing. With that, now there's a default setting here for acoustic guitar. What does that do? It does very little, and that kind of comes back to the fact that with a lot of EQing, you want to do fairly subtle stuff. Now I've done some pretty major changes here so far, but that's just to kind of overemphasize and show you what's going on. You don't necessarily have to cut out as much as I have. It can be kind of dangerous too. But let's cut a little bit more than the default has here. Okay, let's give that a shot. And we go back into multi-track, and we'll have just the piano and the guitar playing together. Okay, those don't clash. That's good. I mean, the guitar is definitely sounding more empty than it was, but that's the point in the mix. So let's see what they sound like when all of them are together. Okay, that was sounding good up to that point, but I want the piano to really stand out in this section. So let's zoom in a little bit so we can see that section better. and it basically goes from here to here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of a dip on the automation of the bass, 2.5 decibels. Come on. It doesn't want to, oh, close enough. And the same thing with the strings. We'll give that just a little bit of a cut back through that section. And let's see what happens now. Okay, so looking at the relative volumes of everything through here, I think that everything is strong here, everything is strong here. Relatively speaking, this whole section works. The piano stands out so well because the bass and the strings have dropped. Now that is going to mean in our final copy of the song, there's going to be a dip in volume through that section, but we'll address that. So at this point, I'm going to hit Control S for save. No, not yet. And what else am I going to do? We're going to go in and add a tiny bit of reverb to each track. Okay. Let's first of all make sure we're zoomed out all the way. Very important. So, stereo piano, highlight all, effects, reverb, and what are we going to do? We're going to do full reverb, studio reverb. Well, that's not the reverb we were used to, but it could work. It's the same sort of setup. Let's go with 100% wet and see what this sounds like. Oops. And we hit apply. And that's why Control Z once again saves the day. Okay, where are we? Reverb. Studio reverb. 100% wet. Let's try a different reverb. Let's see what we have for options. Full reverb. I think that's the one that we were used to. No, that's actually a different type than we used before. So many options with reverb. Okay, I like this one. What we're going to do is we're going to pretend that we're playing in, hopefully, a hall. So we'll use the hall setting. For this one, the mix is just the ratio of dry to wet, and it always adds up to 100. We're not going to play with any of these other ones, hopefully. We're going to start with a completely dry signal and see what it sounds like, and then I'll move it up towards wet until I get a little bit of reverb that I like. Not too much, because I'm going to do some more reverb in a minute. Okay, just a little bit. Now I lost a lot of my volume there. I'm going to Control Z that. I'm going to try once more and set my gain to 0. Now I'm going to save this. We're committed. No going back. I'm going to go through the bass. Am I going to add reverb to the bass? I don't think I will. The reason is you rarely add reverb to bass. It's just, it makes it sound muddy, is the short answer for why you don't normally. Now let's try this. Okay, that sounds a lot better. It sounds more airy and wide. Remember, this is quiet in our mix. So I also noticed that when I was playing it at 100% dry and then moved over to 50%, which is a huge number, I lost a little bit of volume. Try and check that out. Okay, so by compensating with a tiny bit of gain, I think it's going to sound about the same volume as it was before. Remember, adding volume anytime in the editing mixing process is always a little bit risky. Normally you want to drop stuff out instead, but at this point we've got so much headroom here because our peaks are only around minus 15 decibels, and this is going to be quiet in the mix, so I think we're safe adding 2 decibels there. So let's apply that one. Again, that's a huge amount of reverb, more than I would normally do. And I'm going to hit Control S for save. And I'm going to go back to the guitar, and we will add some reverb to the guitar. Okay, again, this is a little bit more than I would normally add, but we're committed now. We're going to do it. Save. And the piano, okay, did we save everything as we went? The bass we probably didn't. Okay, so now those reverbs may have slightly affected our relative levels. Let's try play everything together. Okay, I like it so far. Now, we're almost done. What are we going to do next? We're going to highlight all 4 clips. So select all 4 clips. So I'm holding down Control, clicking on each, and I am going to bounce them all to a new track. Yet again, another bounce. Selected clips only. Okay, so now I'm going to mute those. I'm going to make those a little bit smaller. Let's go, say, down to there. And I'm going to make our bounced track, well, I just messed that up. Okay, here's our bounce track. Let's see what we've got. I'm going to save this right now as final bounced song. Now, you can see the -9 line. I almost touched the -9 there. I go a little over it there a couple times. Down here, oh, I'm hitting like -8, -7, -6. There's one peak here, Basically, -8 is about the level that most of this is at. I'm going to do a hard limit, and I'm going to set it to -8. No input boost. Okay, so now nothing should be above -8. No, that looks about right. I'm now going to put some reverb on the entire track as a whole. Now this is odd, putting reverb on the whole thing when you've already put some on each track individually. Why would I bother doing that? Well, it's because by reverbing all 4 instruments together, it kind of, I guess the phrase would be, it glues them together in the space. It makes it sound like instead of each of the 4 instruments is its own perfectly recorded instrument, now they're as a group in a space and we're physically recording them. And the reverb, the echoes bouncing off the walls in the space are going to feed and interact with the original signal and the reflections of each other instrument. So it's not a case of you being able to put reverb on each of 4 instruments separately. If I tried to do that again now, if I chose one setting on the reverb and did all 4 of them individually and added them together, it would be a different sound than when I reverb the whole of them as a group because of the interactions. And that's another reason why normally I would go with less reverb on the instruments, because I'm basically doing reverb twice. This is a little extreme. Not everybody would do this. This is not appropriate for some styles of music, but I'm going to do it. So we've got a little bit of reverb on almost all the instruments except for the bass, and then we're going to put a small amount on the whole track as a cohesive whole. Fairly minimal though. That's probably good. Okay, now, minor problem with the volumes being down in this. Is there a way to fix it? The easy way would be if I went back out into multitrack and I did some more volume automation. Let's say that we want to raise it by about 2 decibels there. Okay, I like that. That sounds good. So I'm going to bounce yet again. We've got the track highlighted, multi-track, bounce to new track, selected track. Now, did that bump things up enough? Maybe not. Let's Control Z. Let's try 3.2 boost through that section. And we'll bounce to new track. Now I'm using my visuals here as a means of assessing whether I did a good job. Is that the best way? Or is your ear better? Probably your ear. But use both as clues. Okay, so I'm going to mute that. And I'm going to go into this. And you can see that it seems to match the volumes of the rest of the track a little better. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call this After the Gold Rush, because I'm really not going to bounce it again. But what I will do is I'll bump the volume up. I'm going to do a hard limit, not probably what a studio would do. They would do a little bit of amplitude and then they would do some compressing on the top. But to make it simple, until I've got through some compressing videos with you, let's assume that the -12 line here is, let me think. Now let's go with -10. We'll say that nothing above -10 we want to get through. So I'm going to go -10 with 0 input boost. And then I'm going to do a second amplitude and I'm going to raise it by 8 on each channel. And that doesn't really make sense for somebody who's used to this. It would have made more sense to do both in that hard limiting step where I put my gain on at the same time as the hard limiter. But let's keep it in simple separate steps for now. And do we have lots of room left? Yes, we do. So let's raise it a little bit more. Let's go up another 1.5 decibels. And make sure we don't peak anywhere. And it looks like we are not touching 0 anywhere. That's good. And I'm going to zoom in and trim the space at the beginning. Let's give it just a tiny bit of a... And then we'll zoom into the end. Do a fade out so we don't get a click there. And hit save. And then I'm going to go back out into my multi-track session. And I am going to hit save here. Now, because I trimmed the beginning of the clip in waveform view, what's happened is I've got this warning symbol saying this is out of sync with the rest. If I took mute off everything and tried to play this, it's not going to line up with the rest because it's shifted to the left. So Adobe knows that and warns you. That's fine. Session saved. Close. We now have a final version of our song. It's the final bounce. It's a wave quality file. Wave format, which is 1411 kilobits per second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save a copy of that as a 320 kilobits per second MP3, and I will include that in the session folder when I zip the entire folder and make that available as a download link in the text description under the YouTube video. So you can check it out there. I'll probably also put a direct link to the MP3 by itself. Because some people won't want to download the entire session files because you probably won't have Audition. Although you can download the folder and listen to some of the individual WAV files in there. You could probably even import them one at a time into a session of your own in a different digital audio workstation, different audio editor. Okay, so that's about it. I am not going to play the entire song right now. This video is already way too long, but at least this gives you an idea what you can do with a night's work. You can come up with a fairly decent sounding song in a home studio. You don't need a professional studio. And this also illustrates, you saw how long it took me to edit that 3-minute song. It took me a couple hours to do all the editing. And that reinforces the point that if you're going into a studio recording session where say you're paying me to record you, you want to be able to play as well as possible. Because if you're paying me $80 an hour to do editing and stuff like that, the less editing, the better. And you can see a simple track like that, a couple hours editing, gets pretty expensive. So, and the other thing that normally would happen is normally I would record probably 4 takes of each separate instrument. So as I'm going through, I can choose bits and pieces from the various takes and put together a better version of each instrument as a bounce track. And then I've got better material to work with when I do my my final output. Okay, so I'll also I may as well upload this to YouTube as a standalone song. So I'll put the link right here if you really want to keep watching and spend another 3 minutes and listen to what the final song sounds like on YouTube. Here's the link. Anyway, thank you for watching. Apologies that it took so long. The next couple of videos are going to be, I'll do a couple short ones that are more theory oriented. Next, we've done a lot of hands-on stuff here. So we'll switch pace for the next couple audio recording tutorials in the series, and we will also be coming back and doing MIDI recording very soon, which is it's kind of exciting. We could have made this product a whole lot better with MIDI today. You'll see why shortly. Okay, thanks for watching, and check out some of the other videos on my website. Cheers.